Are you struggling to create an intentional headspace, unable to connect deeper with yourself? Come, and together, let's address the elephant in the room. I'm your host, Sinead Roche, and this is the Uncomfortable Podcast. When people hear the word network, I feel like there's a pure sense of dread just that goes through them. And same way with why don't you just go speak to that person? Like what the fuck do you mean? Just because I said someone looks good or looks nice doesn't mean I'm gonna go talk to them. And it's not even just because maybe I'm scared necessarily of rejection, which I am, but maybe it's just the fact that I don't know how to initially start the conversation. And not recently because I've practiced this a bit more, but in the past, I would say maybe 2 years, I have felt like I had a hard time trying to initially engage in conversations with people because I didn't know how to start it off, And I feel like when I was younger and I was in school, it was really easy to kind of start conversations with different people. And likewise in different events, I think especially when I was younger, it was easier to do so because you could honestly just say the statement, "Oh, I hate the fact that we're doing this again," and someone's going to chime in. And I don't want to start off on a negative basis or saying that complaining does help you to engage in conversations, but sometimes it does. But I feel like when I was a kid, it was kind of easier to do. You are in those shared spaces and you're there for a reason, whether or not you have to be there obligatory or because you want to be there. So even going to band camp, for instance, you could just say something about music and someone is going to chime in somehow, some way. But I find myself as I get older, and I feel like also when I'm out of practice of making new friends or making new connections, it gets really hard to start these conversations. Not just because you're oh, fuck, what do I say? But there's also a lot of differences within the groups that you're trying to engage in nowadays, or it always maybe has been like that, but I feel like I'm much more aware of that now. For instance, maybe it's a generational gap. So if I start to say something in terms of a TikTok that I've seen recently, maybe that's not going to go over so well. I think also just understanding cultural differences is something that also definitely impacts how you have a conversation with people, what they value maybe. But even putting all those differences aside, and other aspects that are going to influence having a conversation, I just think the aspect itself of actually learning to engage and starting a conversation with a person has become a skill that is slowly getting forgotten. And I think that's especially because we're in a time right now where, social media, love it, love her. But I feel like it definitely has a negative impact on how we engage with people. Because for me, for example, when I'm on Instagram or something and I see someone who I might want to become friends with or something more, whatever regard, I instantly, the way I start a conversation sometimes is hey, or maybe I send a Instagram reel, for instance, because that kind of gets the conversation starting, and it's a reference to go off of. But I've realized, because I've done this multiple times, is I've tried to transfer how I engage with people initially on social media, also how I engage with people in real life. And so maybe let go of the hey example, but with references, for instance, sometimes I'll say a TikTok reference out loud in a group, and I realize that it backfires on me if the persons are not on the same type of brain rot as me, first of all. And honestly, even if they are, it's not bad to have that as a start of a social cue, but I'm realizing that maybe I don't necessarily want to start my conversations off in that way. Maybe I do want to be able to actually engage without having the social media as kind of a fallback crutch, which, I mean, if that's what gets it started, that's also good. But it's not necessarily something that I want to continue to rely on as I grow older. And I realized that I need to be able to create connections with different groups who are not necessarily always on social media the same way I am. And so that's why I wanted to talk about small talk today and talk about how to actually engage in a conversation, how to actually start the conversation. just because I feel like that is a lost art, and I feel like it is a skill that you definitely have to continuously practice, because there's always going to be something that you have to take into consideration. A new situation will always ask that you adapt to it, but practicing it in itself constantly in these different situations allows you to have a better understanding of the tool of what it is. And I think that allows you to move forward with it in a better way, especially when you're trying to, again, make connections, whether that be like romantic, platonic, professional, friendship, mentors, it doesn't matter. But practicing itself will definitely help you to engage in it more confidently and show up as yourself more confidently when you're starting these conversations. And as someone who's in their 20s and in their quote unquote start of their life, that's especially important. You know, I'm moving around constantly right now. And in the past, I would say that I haven't always seen the necessity that it is, because it was always easier kind of to engage with people, in the sense that we were always like in shared spaces. But now as I grow older, I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, maybe there isn't like a social cue which I can automatically take, that's going to help me to propel this into a conversation. And also, I just want to engage a bit more with people. You know, I do want to be able to get to know different people. And this is just something that I have to learn how to do and kind of overcome the mindset that I hate it. Like, because I have hated it in the past. I still, to this day, will tell you right now that like it's not necessarily my favorite thing, but I do try to reframe that in my mindset and be like, you know what, Sinead, you're about to get to know this other person. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fine. Yeah, initially might be a bit awkward, might feel a bit awkward, but you're going to be okay. You're going to manage. There's a better outcome. There's a result that is waiting for you. So just push through in that sense. And so, I want to talk about that a bit today. I've kind of already talked about the essentials of communication already in season 1 with episode 9, which is all about communication for comprehension. But this is, again, a bit more on just starting the conversation itself with people that you don't necessarily know, don't necessarily have like maybe an understanding of what to even start talking like about. And I hope that this episode helps people who feel like, shit, you know, that just pure sense of dread. Because I know that I felt that, I still feel that, like I said. And so, just really wanted to talk about this a bit, because I feel like we really do, as a generation, as a society, we need to be able to engage with people, and not just like merely in online spaces. As great as that is, I still believe that in-person communication is also something that's super vital to continue to understand and to continue to practice, so that we're actually, you know, having actual conversations like live. And not just like having the, you know, because like when you're on social media or like when you're on text, it's like so easy to be like, no, let me not say that. No, let me not say that. So we kind of have that time to like think about it. But like when you're actually in person, it's like, okay, live, we're ready to go. You know, there's really no pause button. There's no, I can leave you undelivered. You're there. And so I just want people to be able to show up as themselves a bit more. And so moving forward with that, before we get into some examples of how you can actually, you know, start off a conversation, which, yes, I know this might be a bit basic, but still helpful, because we're all going to end up in situations where we're maybe like, you know, we're maybe at these networking events, maybe we want to go talk to someone, or maybe we're stuck in an elevator with someone and it's just like so freaking awkward. So we might as well fill the silence with something. So I still believe that this is useful. But before I get into those examples, I always think it's really important to understand yourself when you're going into these conversations, when you're going into any conversation necessarily. I think it's always important to understand your motivation. You know, do you just want to have like a small conversation right now? Is it just to be polite, or do you want to further engage? And I'm not saying that every single time before you're about to engage with someone, you're going to be able to ask yourself, oh my gosh, do I want to have like a longer conversation? Obviously, you're going to be able to sense as you're speaking to this person, okay, this can go further. Or you're also going to start to feel that kind of dread and just like, oh my God, can this conversation be done with already? And you're going to understand, okay, maybe I just wanted to have a small interaction with this person, which is also completely okay. I do though believe that if you're going into certain settings where like this is basically what it's there for. So I say a lot like these networking events, that you do already understand, okay, what's my motivation? I also believe it's really always important to understand what your current capacity is, because if you're tired, for example, you might not necessarily be in the best place to start a conversation that you really want to go into more depth with. And so maybe just engaging in smaller interactions is something that you can only do for this time. And that's also completely okay. And I think it's especially really important to understand what your capacity is, because that's also oftentimes when it's like the first impression that you're making onto this person, that's who you're showing up as, and that's who you're showing them you are. And for example, there was one time, and I was just talking about this with her. So, I got to this new master's program, trying to get to know all these people. And I feel like the first 2 weeks, I was really social, really open. I was really awake and excited. I wasn't tired. But then at some point, you start to engage with people a bit more one-on-one. And at that point, I feel like it was like, 3-4 weeks into it, I was tired. I was so tired, with work, with classes, with actually talking to people just in general, And this also showed up for me in the way that I was also engaging with people like in conversations. And so there was one time I went with my friend to a boxing class, and I hadn't known her at the time that well. I hadn't really engaged with her. And instead of saying like, hey, how are you? Do you like living here so far? Because I thought at that moment, even though I was motivated to get to know her on a deeper level, I was tired as hell. I thought at that moment, like, it was perfect to say, hey, who are you? What are you about? Like, who says that to a person? I literally told her that. I was like, yeah, so what are you about? Tell me about yourself. The fuck? And she told me that afterwards. She was like, yeah, I don't know why you asked me that question. And like, we were both tired, and I could also tell on her, like, tell from her facial expressions. And like, we were doing boxing as well. Like, so it was more of a physical activity. And yeah, safe to say, always really good to understand like what your capacity is as well, because it will show up, if you're not there fully, if you're not at 100%, or maybe even more than 50%, it's going to show up somehow. And even in the questions that you ask, because like asking someone literally, yeah, who the fuck are you? Or like, what are you about? Maybe not necessarily the best way to go about communication, and go about small talk or learning to engage with someone. And so safe to say, it's always just really important to understand where you are at, and to move with that and to be okay. Because, had I, for instance, been able to just really engage on like the basics with her, then, well, first of all, maybe she wouldn't have that as like the initial first impression of me, which I don't really mind, because she's gotten to know me since. But that'd have been nice to not necessarily have as the first thing that I've said to a person. But anyways, mistakes happen. It's okay. You learn from them. You grow from them. You're still able to like make it up in the long run. So that's not also something that you should focus on so much. All of this is a learning experience. And again, this is a skill set that you have to practice. And so when you're practicing something, you're also ultimately going to make mistakes, or you're going to have lessons that you learn from them. And that's completely okay as well. But let's get into some examples so that it kind of gets a bit easier for us. So when you're going into these conversations, of course, it depends like on the conversation you want to have. I've talked about like, yeah, the motivation, also understanding your confidence level. I feel like, especially when it comes to being in social settings, yes, sometimes if you're an introvert, extrovert, ambivert, all of these things play a role as well. And also if it's like within a group setting versus like a one-on-one, that's also really different. So understand what makes you feel comfortable. I think that's always really important. I know this is about going out of your comfort zone, but still anything else aside, like if you can still manage to do this in a space where you're like kind of calm to a degree, obviously that's going to be allow you to be your optimal self. But otherwise, you'll start to adjust to it as you force yourself out of your comfort zone regardless. But if you can, try to keep that in the back of your mind, like how you're feeling, so you also put yourself in a situation where you set yourself up for success. And so these are a few that I've tried out myself. I've also, I went online and I was like, let me do some research. What do people say? And I realized that people have also used these on me and it works perfectly. And so I hope that maybe these help to some degree. So for instance, you guys can say like, have you noticed that everyone in the room is like wearing black? Like, and this could be like a joke and be like, wonder if it was like a memo or something, so you see a pattern that goes around the room and then you just bring it up to someone casually next to you and maybe that starts a conversation. Then obviously there's the one of like just complimenting someone and then asking up a follow-up question pertaining to that compliment. It's like, oh my gosh, I love your hair. Like, where did you get it done? Oh, like, how did you choose the style? Were there any like inspiration photos, If you're someone who's a bit more confident, or confident isn't the right word, but someone who's a bit less shy, perhaps, you could literally just go up to be like someone like, hey, I'm Sinead. I just had to introduce myself because I noticed such and such, and I just wanted to ask your thoughts on this, Or context dependent, if holidays are coming up, maybe you're at work, ask them about like any fun plans for the holidays. You do not have to go in that depth with it in terms of like, hey, what are you going to be doing this weekend or whatever? But just casually asking someone, and people of course have the right to say no, and you're obviously also going to be able to tell from people's like body language, are they closed off a bit maybe, whether or not they want to engage. And so you don't have to push it. You're also going to see people's boundaries coming up as well. So just take that into consideration. Then, if someone mentions a hobby, how'd you get into that? Then there's like, oh, how did you feel about that meeting we just had? Then the dreaded one, God. Actually, there's two dreaded ones. As students, there's the weather. Oh my God. I hate that one. But like, seriously, sometimes like the weather will just come up. Oh, it's really rainy. And then you can ask a follow-up question like, oh, what would you be doing right now? Rather than like, being here studying, for instance. Or always like the tired, oh, I'm so tired, And then maybe suggest like a different sleep routine. I know these sound silly, but it is a social rule that exists for a reason. And so, yeah, we kind of do still have to practice them. And then maybe like for New Year's, what I started doing, like when it was around that time, I was asking people, yeah, so what are your do you guys have any like New Year resolutions? If you're at a train station, especially in Germany, you can just complain about the Deutsche Bahn and automatically someone's going to start saying something. Or you could be like, oh, I've just moved here. Do you have any like recommendations? Or, this was something that I did at the gym recently the other day. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to say that like, I've seen you and like you have really strong lifts. I just wanted to come over here and like compliment you. Or just asking someone like, hey, like, how are you doing? This is, of course, if you know this person a bit more. And then like, this is something that I've also done at work. I was at this networking event, right? And I was speaking to a coworker that I hadn't really spoken to. And now him and me, like, we talk a bit more. And he's funny. And we were talking about the fact that, like, if you guys have seen How I Met Your Mother, How I Met Your Mother, there's this game that Barney plays. It's called Have You Met My Friend Ted? And so that's first of all how we started engaging, like, oh, have you seen this? This pertains to kind of like how to network sometimes. And so we ended up literally just like creating a game like between him and me and then another coworker. And we started going around and like being like, hey, have you met Ted? And we started making a game out of it. And sometimes it's just fun also to like make some things a bit more playful. Of course, depends again, if you feel comfortable enough to do that, if you feel like the setting like also is allowing for it. But you can just play around with these different things, with these different like examples. I think just the biggest aspect, or like maybe like one of the larger themes of all these examples, is that it's all about asking questions. It's all about being really curious. And that's something that I always try to set myself up for, like in my mind when I'm about to engage with people. I'm like, am I curious about this person? Do I want to really engage with this person? And like, try to set myself up in the way that I feel like I am, because then I'm going to want to ask these questions, and I'm really going to want to like dive a bit deeper into how'd you get into that hobby? And so I really do believe it starts with mindset, of course, you wanting to try to make yourself want to be there. And then from then on, it's just going with that curiosity, asking questions, engaging, and actually listening to what the people are saying. So maybe you have something more to go off of. And what I want to say is that small talk doesn't always have to lead to a deeper connection. As I mentioned, sometimes you're just there for like a small interaction. Sometimes you are there for a deeper conversation, but sometimes and oftentimes what I've had, especially when I engage with conversations with strangers, is that I just have like a good feeling afterwards. And I think most of the time they also have a good feeling. Like it's just nice sometimes to have like a small interaction with someone and be like, oh, hey, how's your day going? Or like, yeah, did you hear about this? And it's usually where I find like, I always have, I don't know, pretty interesting conversations with strangers. I wouldn't recommend 100% right now to just go talk to every single person you see on the street. But I feel like it is fun, but that's also because I'm more of an extrovert myself. So yeah, safe to say, doesn't always have to be like the deepest conversation. Could just be like a small like, yeah, I just met someone, it was chill, had some fun. Not everything has to be that deep, but at least you're still practicing, how to start to engage with people, and it can only get better from there. So yeah, I know that small talk, I know for many of us might still seem pointless. Again, why do we have to follow like society's rules? But I've even realized, even with like close friends, that it's really important to have small talk. I'm usually, like I said, I'm usually someone who likes to get directly to the point, but I've foregone like in the past saying like, hey, how are you doing? Like, checking in with people. And that could just be a me thing. Maybe everyone else naturally like has it in their line that they're supposed to ask how the person is doing. Sometimes I'm just like so amped up and so excited to talk about this one topic that I really do forget to just check in with people before I go into something. And so even if it might seem pointless to do that with strangers, I feel like you can still see the value in it when you're talking with like people who you're close with, or like even family, even, oh my gosh, even my dad, I'm someone who I used to just text him, but he's literally told me, he's like, why don't you start off with saying good morning, or hey, how's your day going? And so I do see the value in that sense, and it's helped me to practice it more, because I'm practicing it with like close people to me, and now also being able to take that and apply it to also strangers as well has done wonders for me. And it also just like allows me to show up more as myself, because I'm no longer like, practicing with like a few like of these lines in the back of my head. Now I really just go into conversations and I'm like, hey, I'm Sinead, nice to meet you, in some sense. And so I do still believe that, even though this is not necessarily like the most glamorous skill to have or to want to build on, it is really essential. You can see it show up for you in ways that are going to benefit you in multiple different scenarios. And of course, you have to adapt it and be a bit more flexible with it. But I do see a lot of benefit from it, and I hope that you guys are also able to see that. And so what I want to ask you guys to do, and try to doing this in a space where you feel safe enough to do it, in a situation where, maybe it's not necessarily with a stranger, but like an acquaintance, for instance. I want you guys to give yourself the goal to do it at least twice this week. To just strike up a conversation with someone just twice and see how it goes, and maybe from then on, if this is a goal of yours, that you continue to practice it, and hopefully you'll be able to, at one point just feel like really natural when it comes to doing this with people you haven't spoken to before, so that you are able to make your presence known. Because I feel like that's really what engagement with people is making your presence known, also making someone else feel heard. And yeah, like I said, sometimes it does lead to deeper connections. Sometimes it's just like a small connection interaction that's like, oh, this was nice. But all in all, I still believe it's a very vital and important skill to learn. And I hope, guys, that you were able to gauge this a bit today from today's conversation. And I hope that you guys are able to, follow suit in some way. Let me know how it goes. Feel free to DM me, or if you guys have any other suggestions in terms of small, like, starter conversations, I'm always here to listen, because even I, as someone who practices this often, can always use other not pickup lines, but like other lines to start it off with. And so with all that said, guys, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Bye. Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Uncomfortable Podcast. Make sure to tune in every Monday for a new episode on Spotify and YouTube. And go ahead and check our Instagram and TikTok for more content. Bye!